there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. So today is another special little video, kind of like we did way back in December, or was it November, for the last bracket challenge. The bracket challenge is coming to a close. We are going on to the semifinals, and we have it already out. So you're going to be seeing this video, and the semifinals will be starting either today or tomorrow. I've gotten a lot of questions in the comments about the seedings and how we decided to seed the entries of this bracket challenge, as well as why we decided to put up some singular books versus entire like 19 book series like New Jedi Order, or why we decided to combine things into trilogies and not just do singular entries. So we promised this video a while ago. I'm going to explain all of that right now as we kind of hype up the semifinals, and eventually as we look forward to the final wrap up video, which will be out on February 20th. And I can announce our guest this time for that. Last video we had Lando's Lounge, who were great guests and provided a lot of great analysis, and it was a lot of fun to have them on. This time we are having Utini on. Eric from Utini is joining us, and we will be talking about all of your matchups as well as showing what our brackets look like. We're going to go more in depth on yours, though, this time. The video will be shorter, and our picks will kind of be background for what we think and why we analyze your matchups a certain way. So that video will be out February 20th. You're going to want to make sure you watch that. But let's look at the seedings here and talk about that first. Sonic and I looked at this originally, and we were trying to decide what's the best way to do it. Trilogies in Star Wars are often heavily influenced by one book after another. If we were looking at the Corellian Trilogy or Black Fleet Crisis or Bounty Hunter Wars, you need to read all three of them to really get the most out of that series. And we look at series like New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, Fate of the Jedi, and even the High Republic. When we look at those series, even though each book can stand on its own, even though the books follow sets of characters or different time periods or different groups within the overall initiative, really it is the story start to finish of the initiative that makes the whole thing. And so that's why we decided to combine something like New Jedi Order for 19 books into one singular entry, because although there are varying books in there, it really is the story of the entire New Jedi Order. If starting with Vector Prime all the way to the Unifying Force, you kind of need and want all of that to make one singular identifiable story. Whereas something like Darth Plagueis is one larger book that contains a self-contained story the entire time, and it doesn't branch off into other things. When we were creating this list, we wanted complete stories to be the central focus. This is a look at Star Wars books, but really it's the look at the stories that are told within Star Wars books. When we're looking at the actual seedings themselves, 1 through 32, there were a lot of different factors we took in. Obviously, critical acclaim is one of the big ones. We also looked at audience score, so something like Goodreads that has people's reviews for these novels, and we combined them if they were in a series into one singular score. So finally, we looked at legacy, and legacy is one of the more important things here, and that's why the Thrawn Trilogy was ranked #1. Other than it is a fantastic trilogy and some of the best Star Wars books of all time, its legacy is second to none. We wanted to pick and choose a collection of Star Wars stories that did have an impact on Star Wars history, so that's why we picked something like the Jedi Academy trilogy to be our 32nd entry, even though the books themselves aren't maybe as critically acclaimed or as well received by the fans as something else that didn't make our top 32. And then, of course, we also wanted to include our personal preferences. It's not really a Star Wars Lads bracket challenge if Sonic and I don't have any input, so we kind of add our own love of certain stories and help that rank the entries as well. And ultimately, those four factors really made up our seeds. So let's look at the seeds themselves. First, we have the Thrawn Trilogy. That's definitely the #1 seed, no matter how you slice it. It was one of the highest ranked on Goodreads. It's the most critically acclaimed Star Wars series of all time. It's one of the most beloved by fans, and it's one of our favorites as well. So it was definitely going to get the top spot. If you're looking purely at Goodreads scores, the Darth Bane trilogy actually has the highest rated score across all three books. It is ranked 4.28 out of 5, and it is one of the most beloved and one of my personal favorites. So that's why we put that at #2. Darth Plagueis is an incredible book, also very highly ranked and beloved by the community. So it's pretty obvious why we put all of our top 4 or 5 entries. And ultimately, as you look at the semifinals, our top 4 that we put ended up being the top 4 because all of them ended up making the semifinals. Rounding out the top 10, Republic Commando, obviously one of the most iconic Clone Wars era series of all time, and then carries on to the future. So we had to include that. Bloodline is arguably Claudia Gray's best book and is one of the key pieces of canon, so we included that one as well. Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy has been one of the most critically acclaimed series we have gotten over the last few years, and especially in canon. It is the most critically acclaimed canon series so far, so that made the top 10. Lost Stars is actually an entry that is very critically acclaimed but also has a pretty good legacy for Star Wars. It was really one of the first canon novels that was super well received, surprised a lot of people. Came out the same day as Aftermath and then eventually pushed beyond it in the critical reception and kind of kickstarted Claudia Gray's career in Star Wars, who has become one of our most iconic authors of canon. So we rank that one in the top 10 as well. The Canon Thrawn Trilogy has also been quite critically acclaimed, although not as critically acclaimed as the Ascendancy or original Thrawn trilogies. So this made our 9th spot. 10th spot was the X-Wing series, and this is the one we debated on splitting in at least two parts. It may be the Michael A. Stackpole series and the Aaron Alston series, so we could separate Wraiths from Rogue Squadron. We decided to combine it all into one entry so it could fit more entries onto the list. Then we followed that up with the High Republic Phase 1, one of the hottest properties right now in Star Wars. We were specifically looking at the adult novels and the young adult novels for this ranking. Then you get into more of the standalone novels. Kenobi is one of the highest rated, so that's 12th, Dark Disciple 13th, Master and Apprentice 14th, Shadow of the Sith 15th, Shatterpoint 16th. Those were really hard to rank, and ultimately we relied a lot on the critical reception for all of them for those spots. We might have ranked Shadow of the Sith higher than some of you would because it's one of Sonic and I's favorite books from last year, but that's why that one got the 15th spot. The Hand of Thrawn duology made the 17th spot, another really critically acclaimed series. Brotherhood, which is very critically acclaimed, also got the 18th spot. And then if you look at critical reviews, Legacy of the Force is actually one of the better received of the publishing initiatives from Legends. So we put that at 19th. But all of those Legends book series do have their mixed received entries, and so therefore they were ranked a little lower than something like High Republic, which has had mostly positive critical reception. We had to include Outbound Flight, Timothy Zahn's prequel to his Thrawn trilogy, the Han Solo trilogy, obviously the seminal Han Solo prequel story, and we include almost every Timothy Zahn book ever written besides Scoundrels, so we included Choices of One here, and then Allegiance down at number 30. One I really fought to put on here because the critical reception actually isn't as high as you would expect, but it is beloved by most people who have read it, and I think it's one of the more underrated Star Wars books ever. Catalyst, a Rogue One novel, is one of James Luceno's best books, and it really should be read by more people. This was another one we debated on doing as singular entries since they're not really connected at all, but the Old Republic books, since there were only 4 of them, we decided to combine them in one entry. Then we get to the darling of the whole bracket so far, one of the lower ranked seeds that made it very high because of all your support, the New Jedi Order. The New Jedi Order is one of the toughest ones to seed. Seeding it at 25 was mostly because of the mixed reception across the books. There are the books that are beloved by a lot of Star Wars fans and that we really love as well. At the same time, there are other entries that feel less important and a bit tedious. There are also some character decisions that not necessarily everybody agrees with, but New Jedi Order's legacy is amongst the top of the top, so we had to rank it in this list. We ended up settling at number 25. Ahsoka is one of the higher ranked books across the fandom, and it had a score on Goodreads that we couldn't ignore, even though Sonic and I both don't necessarily love the novel. Since we included the Jedi Academy trilogy, we had to include I, Jedi, which is arguably the best version of the stories of that series. The MedStar Duology is one of the more beloved Clone Wars stories. Shadows of the Empire we included mostly for legacy, but it is a solid novel. I mentioned Allegiance earlier, it's the last Zahn book on this list. Fate of the Jedi we wanted included because we're including Legacy of the Force and New Jedi Order, but it is probably the least beloved and has the smallest legacy because of the Lucasfilm transition to Disney and the start of new canon immediately after it was released. And then finally, like I mentioned earlier, the Jedi Academy trilogy, we wanted to round out this list with something iconic. There were a lot of Star Wars books and series that almost made our list, and we really debated on those last about 10 to 15 spots on what we should include here. And ultimately, we kind of put a little bit of legacy above almost everything else. Here are some of the entries we almost included. Let us know if you think some of them should have been included and which ones of your favorites weren't included. From canon, we almost put on Rogue One, a Star Wars story. It's one of the better novelizations of canon, as well as The Last Jedi. Leia, Princess of Alderaan is the only Claudia Gray book in Star Wars that is not represented on the list. We almost put that one. Dooku Jedi Lost is Star Wars' best audio drama, and we really wanted to include it here. It fell into that category, though, of how do you compare it to the rest of these novels when you have to either listen to it with all the extra sound effects and added bonuses of audio dramas, as well as when you read it, it's in script form. From Legends, we almost included the original trilogy novelization novelizations, all of which are very interesting in their own right. Survivor's Quest was one of the two Zahn books we didn't include, and ultimately we left it off the list for Allegiance and Choices of One. The Last Jedi was the conclusion of the Coruscant Knights trilogy. We almost included that one as well, and the Coruscant Knights trilogy, we debated on that one. The Clone Wars Gambit, Stealth, and Siege, we almost included as a singular entry, but those are not super well read amongst the Star Wars community. We also have the Clone Wars Wild Space and No Prisoners, again, kind of not super well read across the community, so we wanted a bit more representation from books people really love. Yoda Dark Rendezvous is being concluded in the Essential Legends collection, and we thought that might be a good place for it to have an inclusion. Darth Maul Shadowhunter also just got an Essential Legends collection. We talked about that one as well, and it just missed out. That probably would have been in the next 2 or 3 that might have been on the list. Matthew Stover's Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor, which is an homage to early Star Wars stories. We wanted to include most of Stover's work, but we ended up leaving this one off. And then the 2 other books that have recently gotten Essential Legends collection reprints that we decided not to include because these were probably the lowest quality stories that have gotten Essential Legends collection prints: Dawn of the Jedi, Into the Void, and Death Troopers. And of course, if you look at the entries, we decided to only include young adult and adult novels, so the junior novels were not eligible for our ranking. But that was our method behind this bracket. Again, make sure you're voting. The semifinals will be starting soon, and we do have the semifinals of our top 4 rankings. So we will have the Thrawn Trilogy versus the Revenge of the Sith novelization. I think these are all going to be really close. The most beloved Star Wars novelization of all time versus the most beloved Star Wars trilogy of all time, the thing that's really kept Star Wars going in the 90s. That's going to be an epic battle. And then on the other side of the bracket, we have the Battle of the Dark Side entries, the 2 best Dark Side stories ever. The Darth Bane trilogy, which has been fading a little bit in love on some of the brackets. I mean, it has dominated for the most part, but a lot of people are voicing that they don't love Rule of 2 and Dynasty of Evil. And I can understand that opinion, although I do love all 3. And then Darth Plagueis, which you all know how I feel about that. That's the best singular book's Dark Side entry of all time. It's going to be an epic throwdown between those 2 series. I'm excited to see what you all vote. And then the finals will be decided shortly after that. So make sure you're staying tuned to our community tab. You're voting in all the polls. And also make sure you're tuning into that final recap wrap-up video with Eric from Utini, joining us as we all give our brackets and break down the results of all the matchups from all of your polls. Like we said in the last video, this is a series that's designed to give all of you a voice in our videos and to let your votes decide the outcome of our videos. So we want to give you guys that role. And by watching and liking and commenting and subscribing if you haven't on that video when we post it, it'll really help us continue to push this series forward. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.